Hello, it's nice to see you again. In one of the previous BoTV videos, specifically episode 52, we introduced CLBC's residential services, include group homes, home share, or living support. I also mentioned that there is a system called independent living support. Today, although the topic is still about housing, I will talk about a different subject from CLBC, namely acquiring a home. In the book Happy Life, there is a section called Step 3. Prepare a home that suits your child. First, regarding the concept of a home, the author explains it as follows. A home is the kind of place where, after a long day, you open the front door, take a breath, and feel, I'm home. The essence of a home is not the building itself, but a place where sweat and laughter, wounds and tears, mottled traces, the sound of doors closing, and fingerprints all come together. Just because there is a house does not automatically make it the kind of home we are talking about. It requires careful consideration and care. To achieve this, we need to understand what a home means to our children. What kind of environment are our children accustomed to? How can we create an environment that feels familiar to our children? How can we create a home environment where our children can live comfortably? Worksheets 7 and 8 will help you find answers to these kinds of questions. In particular, worksheet 8 poses a variety of questions to help determine when a house truly becomes a home. Among them, I believe the final question encompasses everything. I made a slight change to the question. Would I want to live in this house? That is the question. Once you have a clear understanding of the concept of home as described above, the next step is to find a type of housing that suits your child. Whether it's a building, a house, an apartment, or even just a room, wherever we live is in fact our home. Whether you own it or rent it doesn't matter. A group home or home share might be suitable for your child, while an owned home might not be the right fit. When we talk about securing a home, what really matters is the following. It's important to have decision-making power over the living environment to ensure your child's unique needs are reflected, and to let your child choose who they want to live with. Next, I'd like to talk about some of the limitations of the current housing alternatives. The government reportedly spends hundreds of millions of dollars each year on housing support for people with disabilities. Of course, this is a good thing. However, a key issue for disability rights advocates and parents is to make it clear that the choice of living environment for their children should not depend on government agencies or service providers. Recently, leading organizations have been working proactively to make group home environments more like private homes. Nevertheless, families still have many concerns. What if the staff, the person in charge, or the leadership of the organization changes? What if the funding that the organization receives is cut? These are the kinds of things they worry about. This does not mean that group homes, semi-independent living, or other residential alternatives are wrong. It simply means that these alternatives have their limitations. When talking with families, I often hear concerns about residential support services for people with disabilities, such as group homes or home sharing. They worry that their child has no say in deciding where to live. The needs of other roommates are prioritized over the individual's needs. A third party decides who will live with their child. The atmosphere of the home is shaped more by the staff working there than by the people living there. Some group homes do not welcome the involvement of families or friends. Residential stability is not guaranteed. There are concerns that the staff or managers who genuinely care for and understand their child might be replaced, because when these people change, it has a significant impact on their child's life. According to statistics, the average length of stay in a home share is about 2 years. In some cases, people get along well with one family for a long time, but in other cases, the home share changes frequently. If the home share changes or if the group home needs to be changed, parents, if they are alive, will actively get involved and try to find a place that suits their child. However, after the parents pass away, there is anxiety because it is uncertain which home share or group home their child will end up in. These concerns ultimately lead families to seek out more flexible, stable, and controllable housing alternatives. One such alternative is self-owned or permanent rental housing, where the caregiver may change, but there is no need to worry about changing the living space. So today, I'd like to talk about acquiring a home through self-ownership or permanent rental arrangements. Most of us want to own a home. However, in many cases, we think that this dream does not apply to people with disabilities. Among our children with disabilities, there are probably some who also wish to own their own home. Some children hardly need a caregiver, while others definitely need an assistant. Whether the home is owned by the child with a disability, co-owned with parents or other family members, or held in trust under the child's name, if the child owns a home in any form, they now have the right to decide where to live, whom to live with, and whom to hire. A permanent lease can also be similar to home ownership. A mother I know said this after purchasing a home in her child's name. The people living together may change and the support services may also change. But there is one thing that remains constant. That is, even if I am gone, that house will always be there for my daughter. Providing a home for a child with a disability is not an easy task. For those who are financially well off, it's not much of an issue, but in most cases, the biggest concern is securing funds to purchase a home. The methods for securing home purchase funds introduced in the book A Happy Life are as follows. First, secure the purchase funds through the RDSP. Detailed explanations about the RDSP can be found in BoTV episodes 18 through 23. Please refer to those videos. To briefly explain in relation to housing, after saving for 30 years, you can withdraw a lump sum and use it as funds to purchase a home. If your child was diagnosed at age 3 and enrolled in the RDSP, after 30 years when they turn 33, a lump sum would be available. So it's best to enroll in the RDSP as early as possible. Even if you only save the minimum amount of $125 per month, after 30 years, with government grants and investment income combined, it will amount to about $300,000 to $400,000. If you save more each month, the amount you can withdraw after 30 years could reach $500,000 or even $600,000. If you buy a house in your 40s instead of your 30s, the savings period becomes 40 years, so the amount you can withdraw will likely exceed $1 million. If your family doesn't have a lot of funds, the RDSP becomes a very important means to help your child purchase a home when they are in their 30s or 40s. Alternatively, it could be used to pay off the remaining mortgage on a house that was purchased earlier. At the end of chapter 3, in the book Happy Life, 4 cases are introduced where the RDSP is used to purchase a home, so I recommend you look them up and read them. The second method is to change the collateral arrangement on the family home to raise the necessary funds. Third, you could form a partnership with other parents to purchase a home. Fourth, you can use a reverse mortgage. And fifth, you can cooperate with a local development company that, after receiving land use approval from the city authorities, develops housing at a low cost in exchange. You can allocate a portion of your inheritance to create a housing trust that can only be used for purchasing a home. Seventh, you can take out a life insurance policy and use the insurance payout to fund the purchase of a home. Eighth, you can take out a life insurance policy and use the insurance payout to establish a housing trust. In this case, you can allow rooms to be rented out in order to repay the loan. The book discussed these methods for securing funds to purchase a home in a simple way. But I'd like to share a few more specific alternatives that I've thought about. The first alternative is for those who may not have the financial means to buy a house outright without a mortgage, but can afford a down payment of about 20% and are able to finance the remaining 80% with a mortgage. This is something worth considering. That is, using the parents' house as collateral to make the down payment and then taking out a mortgage on the purchased house itself. If the child with a disability has an income, the mortgage can be taken out in the child's name. If the child does not have an income, the mortgage would need to be in the parent's name. At this point, whether the house should be owned by the parents, the child, or held jointly, involves considerations of taxes, inheritance, and estate division, so it is important to consult with a professional. If the child owns the house, they can live there and apply for live-in support, which is a form of shared living through CLBC. As I explained before, this means that instead of the child with a disability moving into someone else's home, a caregiver comes to live in the child's home. Therefore, a certain amount of rent is collected from the caregiver and used to pay the monthly mortgage. And if your child were to move into a home share, they would have to pay $500 from their PWD benefits as shelter costs to the home share. But since this is their own home, there's no need to pay that amount, and that money can instead be used to pay the monthly mortgage. Let me explain with an example. Suppose a two-bedroom apartment costs $600,000 and you make a 20% down payment. That means you take out a mortgage for the remaining 80%, which is $480,000. Assuming a mortgage interest rate of around 4%, when I use a mortgage calculator, the monthly mortgage payment comes out to about $2,500. Let's also assume that the monthly rent for a typical two-bedroom apartment is about $2,500. If we assume that out of the amount the caregiver receives for home share, they pay $1,500 per month as rent, and the child with a disability pays $1,000 per month, including $500 from PWD shelter allowance. Then the monthly mortgage cost is covered by the rent. If the interest rate drops further to around 2% or 3%, the monthly mortgage payment will be less than $2,200, so the burden will decrease even more. Since it's reasonable to assume that housing prices in Vancouver, Canada, will continue to rise, I think this could be an alternative worth considering for future asset value as well. The second case is when a family can afford to pay an amount equivalent to 20% of the home price, but is unable to obtain a mortgage. In this situation, the family makes a deposit of $120,000 with an agency like Here and Now. Here and Now uses the $120,000 deposit as the down payment and takes out a mortgage for the remaining $480,000 in the agency's name. The ownership of the house belongs to the agency. Using the same example as in the first case, the agency covers the monthly mortgage payment with $1,500 in rent from the care donation and $1,000 in rent from the child with a disability. And a contract is made allowing the child with a disability to live in the house until they pass away. Of course, if they want to move out before then, they are free to do so. In that case, the agency returns the $120,000 deposit to the family. And then the agency receives a new $120,000 deposit from the family of the next child with a disability who will live in the house. The third scenario is when the family is unable to make a down payment or obtain a mortgage. In this case, the agency, such as Hero, covers both the down payment and the mortgage amount. Naturally, the ownership of the house belongs to the agency. And the family pays interest on $120,000, which is equivalent to 20% of the house price. This interest rate is the same as the rate applied by banks for loans. And the remaining monthly rent conditions are the same as those explained in the second example. These alternatives are ideas that I am suggesting at a conceptual level. To actually implement them, more detailed discussions would be necessary. However, all of these alternatives ensure that whether the family owns the house or the agency does, the child with a disability can continue living in that home for as long as they wish. And for caregivers who want to do home sharing but can't because they don't have a house, this also provides an alternative that allows them to participate in home sharing. Next, let me provide some additional information on a few other matters. If you need funding for home renovations, there is an organization called CMHC, which stands for Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. If you contact them, there is a program that provides loans to help renovate homes for the convenience of people with disabilities. The name of the program is RAP. It stands for Residential Rehabilitation Assistance Program for Persons with Disabilities. Next, you need to consider alternatives for home ownership, whether the property should be owned solely by your child, jointly with the parents, and as part of a permanent rental housing cooperative, as a leasehold ownership, or as co-housing. There are various options available. There are also different forms of joint ownership, such as joint tenancy and tenancy in common. Joint tenancy means that all co-owners each own 100% of the property together. In this case, if one of the owners passes away, their ownership share automatically transfers to the remaining owners. Tenancy in common means that ownership is divided according to specific shares. For example, if two people each own 50% and one of them passes away, the deceased's 50% share is handled according to inheritance laws. Now, in terms of housing types, there can be condos, townhouses, detached houses, co-housing, or what is called infill housing, which utilizes systems that allow homes to be built in vacant spaces. You also need to consider the costs of maintaining the home. You have to think about maintenance costs, strata fees, home insurance premiums, and how you will handle property taxes as well. So today, I introduced some alternative ways to secure a home where you can live without having to move, as long as your child wants. That could be in the form of home ownership, or it could be a permanent rental arrangement. Next time, I will be back with the topic of respecting your child's wishes. It will mainly be a session introducing consent for power of attorney. Thank you for watching until now.